Welcome to this week's edition of the Business 7 Show. My name is Sukhana Klache, and let's take a look at key events that made the headlines this week. Air Botswana CEO Lulu Rasebotsa says the airline has made significant progress ever since launching scheduled services between Gaborone, Botswana and Windhoek in November last year. Let's take a look at what she had to say.
My name is Lulu Rasebotsa. I'm the CEO of Air Botswana. Air Botswana is super excited to have launched its route into Windhoek, which started on the 29th of November 2024. In the past 2 months since the launch, we've been able to transport just south of 650 passengers. For a new route, that's a phenomenal number. Air Botswana is very much a part of Namibia. We've recently appointed a general sales agent, being airline pros here in Namibia. So for anything Air Botswana related, for anything Botswana related, your go-to sales agent is airline pros based here in Windhoek. We're looking forward to partnering with local charters to make sure that as we bring tourists into Windhoek, they can then take them to the coastal areas of Stockholm, etc. We are very pleased that we are leveraging off of the very close relationship that the Botswana government has got with the Namibia government. I think as an airline to be strategically located right at the heart of SADC, it is our intention to dominate the sub-Saharan Africa as a gateway to the rest of the world and to the rest of Africa.
PetroFund CEO Nillian Mulemi says Namibia has seen the emergence of several oil and gas companies following the discovery of oil resources in the Lulu Basin since early 2022.
Hydrocarbons in Namibia starting in 2022, 2023 and 2024 by 3 oil and gas explorers. Many more major oil and gas company exploration companies as well as service companies have come to Namibia to not only undertake exploration activities, while those that made discoveries implemented both exploration activities and appraisal programs to assess the commercial viability of the discovered hydrocarbons. At the moment, we are all, including myself, keenly awaiting the official announcement of the appraisal results of these discovered reserves. Many companies are rushing to Namibia because of these discoveries. It has thus become imperative that we forge strategic relationships to position our youth to secure meaningful employment in this lucrative sector. It is in this light that the PetroFund has rolled out multifaceted interventions to ramp up skills development and also strengthen our local training institutions.
The Namibia Financial Institution Supervisory Authority recently launched its revamped website. The regulator's CEO, Kenneth Matamola, explains the rationale behind the launch of the website.
The revamped website stands as a testament to our dedication of operational efficiency, transparency, and accountability. It is now a one-stop resource hub where you can effortlessly access regulatory updates and compliance guidelines, which includes the licensing and legislation. You can explore key publications that includes our business plan, quarterly bulletins, and annual reports.
In news making the headlines this week, Namibia oil dreams face reality check after Shell write-off. Namibia's aspirations of becoming a major oil producer have encountered a significant hurdle after Shell wrote off 400 million related to an unsuccessful well in the Orange Basin. However, despite this setback, energy consultancy firm Wood Mackenzie, or rather Woodmac, believes that Namibia's prospects are not entirely dashed and other companies are making progress. Exploration is fraught with risk. Technical success rates average below 40% globally. For frontier basins, the risks are greater with lower technical and commercial success rates relative to established and mature basins, Woodmac said. According to Woodmac, Namibia has demonstrated strong technical capabilities in its exploration efforts, but achieving viability is proving difficult. Namibia stands out with a high technical success rate, but commercial success is now looking like a real challenge. While the Cretaceous deepwater turbidite classic play is effective in the Orange Basin, well-level risks such as reservoir complexity and distribution have to be taken into account, the firm said. Air Botswana sees Namibia as key to growth strategy. Air Botswana is optimistic about its growth prospects in the region, particularly in Namibia, following the launch of scheduled services between Gaborone, Botswana, and Windhoek in November in 2024. The airline has already transported over 600 passengers between the two countries since the route's inception, a milestone its CEO Lulu Rasebotsa highlighted with pride. I think across the region, everybody knows that Botswana and Namibia have a very close bromance going on. And it's on the back of that we thought it was important that we collaborate and find routes into Namibia, and for the fact that because of the proximity, there's a lot of relations in terms of family on both sides of the border, Rasebotsa said. Air Botswana had identified cargo as one of its key revenue drivers following its entry into Namibia. There are a lot of business opportunities across, and I also think on the back of the fact that Air Botswana is trying to drive cargo hard, so I think there's an opportunity for us to participate in cargo imports out and exports into Namibia, she said. Another factor positioning Namibia for Air Botswana was the hordes of tourists who flock into the country on an annual basis. According to Rasebotsa, there was an opportunity for her airline to fly tourists to popular tourism destinations in Botswana.
Slow internet should be a headache of the past, yet many Namibians have connections that just aren't fast. We have a solution that might set you free. It's called Mobile LTE, and it comes with real speed. You'll enjoy up to 50 megabytes per second from just $300 Namibian a month and free internet browsing after midnight till 6. When it comes to staying connected, this is it. Visit paratus.africa/Namibia or our branches nationwide and experience the thrill of better internet with Paratus by your side.
Always prepared, Paratus.
Namibia is yet to agree to an oil stabilization agreement with several oil and gas companies currently drilling for prospects owing to the lack of information on potential discoveries, Cyrus Capital said in its overview on projections for the economy for 2025. The fiscal stabilization agreement is seen as being critical as it provides provision that accommodate risk of regulatory changes to investors, according to the Oxford Institute of Energy Studies. Negotiations thus far have not been successful in getting a fiscal stabilization clause in any agreement with the government since conversations began. The government, it appears, is reluctant to grant said clause as there is still limited information on what would be given up, Cyrus Capital said in its economic overview. Another worrying factor for Cyrus was the lack of clearly coordinated communication between the Ministry of Mines, which is the regulator in the oil and gas sector, and the Ministry of Finance, which is responsible for tax policy. And wrapping up this week's edition of the Business 7 show, we look at a recent interview Green Hydrogen Commissioner James Newpe conducted with Royal Management Services.
James, such an honor to have you here at the second Royal Investment Forum.
Thanks, Renee.
It's fantastic to have guys like you share very interesting knowledge with us, important things happening in the country.
Absolutely.
I must say, the first thing, I mean, you've embarked on a crazy journey, you know, as economic advisor of the president.
Yeah.
What was your biggest surprise on this journey?
Yeah, look, I mean, I came in sort of thinking, acumen's going to take you all the way. I had some very, very humbling lessons to learn along the way. But, before I get into that, I really wanted to say thank you to you and Royale in general, for bringing a diverse set of speakers to speak to Namibians. I think we need to increase that level of dialogue. But, I joined September 2020. And to be honest, between then and now, I thought I would be doing the very traditional economic analysis, but very quickly, my principal gave me a very interesting assignment, and the assignment was, look, let's explore whether we can set up whole new sectors, right? Things that we're not doing. The NSA, the central bank, the Ministry of Finance will take care of all that data monitoring, but can we do some innovative stuff? In the beginning of the term, there was a newspaper article that said treasure hunters. And that group of government people was actually led by Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah at the time. And we went to the Middle East. Menangula was there. I was lucky enough to be part of that journey. And we were told essentially to go and bring new investments into ports. And today, we've got the largest basically shipping company in the world, certainly by container, running one of our container ports. And that assignment resulted in that particular output. But it's very hard to connect the two. And so, of course, some of those other assignments were the ones people know me for the most, which is explore whether we can set up green industries in Namibia that are looking to sort of utilize our renewable energy resources. And I think that one's the one that really surprised me the most. And some of the massive surprises were the level of innovation by Namibians, right? We found ourselves sort of leading in this sector globally. We thought we would learn from others, but as we speak today, we're about to do things that no one else has done in the world. To be honest with you, Rene, I was also surprised by the level of backlash, right? So we're obviously doing things that are hard to understand or maybe don't exist, so it's very hard to create precedences or to look at other case studies. And so the amount of, I think, either backlash or doubt or people just don't believe in it was interesting for me. But along the way, I've learned to grow a bit of a thick skin, but also to stay on mission. And I've got 2 more months to go before I sort of hand over my final report card to my existing principal. And I'm looking forward to that day because I think we've actually been able to do quite a few interesting things as Namibians.
So James, before I ask you the last question,
Sure.
You've intrigued me. Is there anything that you're willing to share with us, in terms of interesting breakthroughs that you've done recently?
Yeah, sure. Let me start with something like this. So if you Google sort of the internet right now and you sort of say average electrolyzer prices per kilowatt hour, you'd see numbers like 2,000, 3,000 per kilowatt hour. And the truth is, that's very expensive, or at least the hydrogen that will come from that investment will be expensive. But as we speak in Arandis, one of our local companies, we were just looking at his model the other day. His all-in costs are just actually under $400 a kilowatt hour. Okay.
Wow.
And there's a combination of things there, which obviously we will explore a bit more later on. But really affordable equipment from China is a big part of that. Affordable land, right? He went and bought a farm in basically just behind the Valencia uranium mine that you could never get that size of land anywhere else around the world for that price, because essentially it was a distressed asset with the farmer just not being able to make ship farming work. And of course our labor as well, right, has just been, it's much cheaper to do this here than to try to do it in Berlin or something like that.
Yes.
And so that sort of price translates into very affordable prices of hydrogen. And then unlike conventional sort of wisdom, we're actually not looking to export the molecule. We're using the molecule at home to add value to a commodity that we're actually importing from South Africa for dirt cheap as well. So the iron ore that he's able to get from South Africa is actually in some instances waste for that particular mine, and he's willing to give it away for really, really cheap prices. It's his contract, so I can't disclose that.
I understand.
But he's able to flip that around with the locally produced hydrogen and create value that's 10x. He'll buy this thing, let's argue, for $30 a ton, and he's able to sell, DRI for more than $300 a ton. For an offtake that has signed, an offtake for, something like 13 times his annual production.
Amazing.
And so, that is a massive breakthrough, not in Namibia. It's a massive breakthrough around the world because it's not being done anywhere in the world. And on top of all of that, they're now looking at other studies where the DRI can actually be a hydrogen carrier. So in a nutshell, this direct reduced iron, it's essentially iron ore stripped of oxygen. So it's very high concentrated iron. And when you transport it to somewhere else, you can react it again with water vapor, and it'll bind with the oxygen, producing hydrogen.
Oh.
So now the DRI becomes a potential hydrogen carrier, and you can now produce hydrogen in another country without actually having to transport the molecule. You're transporting DRI,
Yes.
iron ore. It's a lot easier to put that on a dry bulk carrier.
Yes.
That's a global breakthrough that is now, the study was commissioned and they're now sort of doing the commercial tests on that.
Yes.
So that's the kind of stuff Namibians are solving for, and it's not being done anywhere else. And it's amazing, but at the same time, it's also understandable that Namibians are just like, whoa, that doesn't compute just yet. But 7th of March now is the date. President should be going to unveil this plant and we'll be able to sort of open up the books more. But it's a massive kudos, I think, to a government that really went to work very closely with the Namibian SME and foreign players to unveil such amazing opportunities here in Namibia.
And it sounds like innovation unfolding. Well done.
Absolutely.
James, maybe just quickly, we know we're in very interesting times globally.
Yeah.
We see, Trump tariffs, artificial intelligence.
Yep.
I mean, I was just looking again, I think roughly mid 30% is what Magnificent 7 now makes up the S&P 500.
Correct.
The US roughly, if I'm not mistaken, nominal GDP only 26% of the world, but US stocks making out 70% of the globe. Very interesting dynamics, seems like anti-climate sentiment. How do you see emerging markets, or maybe specifically Namibia within this context?
Yeah. I think amazing. So one of the key things there that you say that is very, very true is Namibian assets are quite cheap relative, right? If you compare us with the US in various terms, whether it's hard assets, price, sort of housing, land, we get quite a few people coming to Namibia and buying large tracts of land. They're setting up warehousing companies and buying up property and warehousing for industrial uses. So Namibian assets are cheap on a relative basis. And our fiscal metrics have actually been getting a lot better, or at least better along the way.
In the right direction.
If you look at sort of our revenue collection has been getting better. We're now running primary surpluses. Our debt to GDP has come down, right? People were expecting it to go to 75, it's at 65.
Yeah.
So those metrics are better. Our spreads versus South Africa have compressed.
Yes.
On the other hand, I think what you are seeing is a bit of a massive challenge, let's call it, to multilateralism, right? So it's kind of like we're going into this neighborhood where everyone's looking after themselves. Trump has said, the US is first. He's putting up these tariffs, which initially sounds like he wants to put up barriers around US industry so that US industry essentially can thrive with a protected domestic market. But as a result, you're going to have, obviously trade wars. We've seen Canada fire back, China's fired back today. And it's likely you end up seeing inflation. And with that inflation coming through the US, it's likely you end up seeing, it'll be harder for central banks to cut rates. The dollar will get stronger, which essentially means our currencies get weaker, which means we might get inflation as well, which means our central banks might find it harder to support our economies as well. And so I think in the midst of all that, you also get a very interesting reality for oil prices, because Donald Trump wants to pump. He says drill baby drill, so you might get supply pushes from there, and with that happening, you might have an interesting sort of glut of supply that could put downward pressure on oil. Obviously, these days we care a lot about what happens to the oil prices.
Exactly.
Look, having engaged with some of the oil majors here, I think some of our projects seemingly are attractive enough, even at modest oil prices. So hopefully that goes ahead anyway. But without a doubt, I think lower oil prices will put pressure on the Middle East as well, and then put pressure on OPEC. So will OPEC cut to support, or will Saudi Arabia say, I want to maintain market share? And if they do that, and they print, or rather they pump to support market share, I think you're going to see lower oil prices. Now that might help a little bit with inflation, but I think for Namibia, that's a very interesting thing to watch. But the larger thing I think for me is, maybe you had this sort of, the West was really trying to play a role of leading the world, but now you've basically got Trump taking on Canada. He's likely going to take on the EU. We're going to see a lot more spending on defense from the EU, which means there should be lower spending for social programs. USAID from the US is coming under stress, BMZ is coming under stress. So it essentially means even for us, our projects that we're sort of relying on a lot of support from outside, whether it's grants, etc., if you don't have strong commercials, you'll likely come under significant pressure as well. And so, if I'm in Namibia, I'm definitely looking at holding on to some decent hard assets, right?
Yes.
So whether that's property, whether that's land, whether that's dollar-based assets offshore.
Or proper businesses that generate good cash.
But and they need to be fairly robust because they need to be able to ride thorough waves. So that would be a good one. So, but valuations matter. You would know this better than most people in Royale. And I think if I'm the Namibian government, I think hard about my budget, about my monetary policy, which I'm not so independent on, but certainly my fiscal policy.
May I interrupt you there?
Absolutely.
With my last question.
Sure.
So if I was head of state,
Yeah.
what is the most important thing you would advise me on today?
Well, so first of all, it's my last 2 months on the job, so I guess I can be quite adventurous in what I advise you, because you're going to kick me out sooner rather than later. But I do think for Namibia today, from an economic perspective, the biggest things that we have to hold on to are the fiscal gains, right? We've made some really decent, the Ministry of Finance, and let's give them credit together with Central Bank, etc. have done a great job of trying to make sure our balance sheet looks better. If you're a new president coming in, there might be some temptation to, especially if there's a lot of headwinds coming from overseas, to try and stoke economic growth from a fiscal policy perspective. And one has to be careful about that. Because if you have hard currency debt, for example, and your currency weakens from the pressures we just spoke about, you could find yourself in a very precarious situation where your primary, surplus could get swallowed up pretty soon as well, with very high costs for servicing your debt. So how it is that we can sort of encourage and motivate innovative growth from the business sector, from the private sector, without necessarily having to put too much dry powder from the public sector, I think is going to be key. I do think we're seeing some of that sentiment from the government. Obviously, there are a couple of policies we're waiting to come up, including, of course, our Investment Promotion Act. But I do think NIPDB, and to be honest, a lot of the other government agencies have done a good job on that. A key thing, of course, is unemployment. So really supporting those, let's call them labor-intensive sectors. Our new president really wants to support agriculture, and how we do that well, and whether, it's how do you do that and make sure that you're not super dependent on just climate. Will be a very important one. I know there are debates around the red line. But roughly that's what I'd be saying to our president. Look, your choice for Minister of Finance would be massive.
Yes.
Think very hard about, sectors, or at least SOEs like Air Namibia. Think very hard about what we do with Namcor. Trans-Namib will be absolutely pivotal now. They've gotten an injection to really get the logistics sector going. I personally think the construction and the logistics sector can be two engines of growth, especially if we get these FID and some of the synthetic fuel assets come on board. So how do you get those two sectors going? And then agriculture would be a massive focus. So how do we get it to be labor absorptive? You can't ignore things like vertical farming. Can we produce some of our own fertilizers? All of that, I think, will be quite key for the president to consider. But likely I've only got 2 months before I can do something more interesting or focus on the assignment I've been given. But thank you, Mr. President, for the opportunity anyway.
Well, James, I think what you've been doing sounds very interesting. And once again,
Thank you.
a very, very big honor to have you.
Such
Thank
a
you,
pleasure
James.
to be here. Thanks for having us. And this view is amazing.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Taking flight has never been easier. Paratus is introducing Sky-Fi internet packages with speeds that will have you reaching for your seatbelts, starting from $500 Namibian excluding VAT per month, with speeds reaching up to 10 megabits per second. There's even a prepaid option where you can top up your Sky-Fi internet for just $15 Namibian per gigabyte. No contracts, no fuss. Visit your nearest Paratus branch to find out more, or go to paratus.africa/Namibia to sign up online.
Always prepared.
And that concludes this week's edition of the Business 7 show. Have yourself a pleasant evening further.